Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something pretty fascinating, Pietro Ubaldi's Evolution and Gospel.
hmm
It's this book that looks at spiritual evolution, like in the gospel, and how it connects with biological evolution, cosmic evolution, the whole shebang.
Right. And our mission here really is to pull out the core ideas.
Mhm.
Ubaldi's work can be dense.
Definitely. So we want to kind of give you the essence, the key takeaways, so you feel well informed without needing, weeks to read it.
Exactly. Tailored for you, the listener, to grasp what he's getting at and why it might matter.
And he kicks off with something that really makes you think. He calls it spiritualist evolutionism.
Yeah, that's a big one straight away.
It basically throws out the idea that evolution is just random material changes. He suggests it's actually
The
guided.
guided journey, yeah. Back towards a kind of lost perfection and driven by intelligence.
Yeah.
It really challenges the standard view.
It absolutely does. So where does he start building this idea from?
Well, a really fundamental concept for him is this contrast between two positions, or maybe types of individuals, the evolved and the involuted.
Okay, evolved and involuted. Let's break those down. What does evolved mean in his context?
For Ubaldi, the evolved person is someone who lives by the principles of the gospel. They're operating more on a spiritual level.
So thinking about understanding, reconciliation.
Precisely. And forgiveness is key. He even says only the evolved can truly grasp and use the gospel's approach, meeting aggression with forgiveness. It's a delicate mechanism, he calls it.
Interesting. But he also says they struggle to fit in here on Earth.
Yeah, that's a curious point. They might find it difficult to adapt to the general way the world works, maybe even get sort of expelled or pushed aside.
Okay, so that's the evolved. What about the involuted?
The involuted individual lives more by the law of the world, the material plane. Think aggression, self-preservation through struggle, competition.
Right. The survival of the fittest kind of mindset.
Very much so. Ubaldi says they instinctively know how to fight, how to wage war. And for them, winning against an enemy is like the ultimate achievement.
And they feel comfortable here.
They feel at home, yes.
Mm.
Where the evolved might feel exiled, the involuted feels like this is their domain.
But it's crucial, isn't it, that he's not saying one is just flat out superior to the other.
Absolutely not. That's really important. It's a scale, a spectrum of evolution. We're all somewhere on that line. It's not a simple judgment.
So understanding these two perspectives, it gives you a way to look at people, at society.
Definitely. It's a framework, you could say. A lens for analyzing behavior, motivations, maybe even why certain conflicts happen, offers a different perspective.
Okay, so beyond these types, he digs into evolution itself. You mentioned he disagrees with materialist evolutionism.
Strongly. He rejects that idea of it being purely random, purely physical.
And his alternative is the spiritualist evolutionism.
Right. And that's not just a different label. It's a whole different concept. For him, evolution isn't aimless. It has a goal, a preset, inevitable goal.
Which is?
Returning to that lost perfection, returning to God, essentially.
Wow. So even the randomness we see, the trial and error.
That doesn't negate the goal, in his view. He uses the term telefinalism. There's an ultimate endpoint. The trial and error is just part of the path towards that end.
That's a real shift in thinking, an aha moment, maybe.
It could be, yeah. It reframes the whole process from random chance to a purposeful journey.
So evolution moves from matter to life and then upwards.
Towards the spiritual. That's the trajectory he sees. A clear progression and ascent.
Which naturally leads us to think about morality, ethics. How does that fit into this evolutionary picture?
Well, Ubaldi doesn't mince words about our current situation. He calls contemporary morality a moral of war.
A moral of war, meaning focused on conflict, not justice.
Exactly. Not true justice. He argues real ethics should protect the individual property rights, basically. It should protect the species, the family unit. And crucially, it should protect evolution itself.
How do you protect evolution?
By defending the evolved. Supporting those who are further along that spiritual path.
And he talks about a new moral.
Yeah, one that works through interaction, like between leaders and followers, a dynamic process.
But then he brings in the gospel's teachings, which seem radical in comparison.
Absolutely radical. Non-resistance, loving your enemies, not worrying constantly about material things. He says this is a complete reversal of the biological law of survival, of the instincts we developed.
So Christ's message, in this view, was trying to shift us to a whole new level.
A new plane of existence, yeah. Governed by totally different principles for protection and development beyond just the fight for survival.
He even applies this to things like owning property.
Right. He
Okay.
suggests that the gospel implies that property comes with duties. You should use it for positive, collective good, not just selfishly or harmfully.
And that phrase, seek the kingdom of God and his justice, how does Ubaldi interpret that?
Not just as some abstract spiritual goal. He sees it as a practical path. If society operated on cooperation and goodwill seeking, that kingdom material needs would essentially take care of themselves. Less desperate scrambling for money.
That's optimistic.
It is, but it follows from his core logic about spiritual principles having real-world consequences.
One point that really stood out for me was about morality being relative to evolution.
Yes, that's key. Different stages, different moral codes. What seems okay, even necessary for someone involuted, might be wrong for someone evolved, and vice versa.
So there's no single absolute moral code that applies equally to everyone at all times.
Not in the same way, no. It depends on the evolutionary stage. But he does give direction. The highest moral action for the involuted is to try to behave like the evolved, to aim higher on that scale.
Okay, this brings up the church. How does the institution representing the gospel fit into this picture, especially its relationship with the world?
Ubaldi is quite direct about this. He sees a fundamental incompatibility. The gospel's principles and the world's operating system, as it currently is, they just don't mesh easily.
Like trying to run advanced software on old hardware.
That's a good analogy. He uses one about a delicate jet plane, people trying to fly it without understanding the controls, maybe using it like a simple cart. The gospel gets distorted, adapted to human limitations, to our more basic self-interested psychology.
Power, self-interest. Those worldly concerns creep in.
They do. And he talks about the tension the church faces. Its ideals are based on love, forgiveness. But operating in the world often requires authority, discipline, sometimes methods that look, well, worldly.
What about things like heaven and hell?
He sees those historically as maybe necessary psychological tools for a less evolved humanity, motivators based on self-interest, fear of punishment, desire for reward, greed and terror, essentially.
But maybe outdated now.
Who suggests they might be as humanity evolves? Less effective, perhaps even counterproductive for spiritual growth beyond a certain point.
And he warns the church about adopting the world's methods too closely.
Yes, there's a danger there. Seeking political power, using force. He argues that risks compromising its spiritual core, making it vulnerable, losing its true strength.
But what about leadership? Isn't authority sometimes necessary?
He acknowledges that. The principle of authority is needed to guide those who can't yet guide themselves. But the goal, always, is towards freedom as individuals evolve and gain that capacity for self-direction.
So let's shift to the engine driving all this. What pushes evolution forward, according to Ubaldi?
He talked about a fundamental cosmic and biological dynamism, a relentless drive of life itself to conquer space, expand, reach for higher dimensions.
And pain. What's its role? It usually seems like something to avoid.
Ubaldi sees it differently. Not just negative, it's disharmony, an alarm bell signaling we're off course.
So it forces us to change.
It compels us to rise, yes. It's a tool life uses to ensure progress, even when we'd rather stay put. Pain pushes us when we resist the natural upward flow.
And our reaction to pain reveals something about us.
Definitely. It shows our true nature, our evolutionary level. Negative reactions, betrayal, violence, lashing out pull us down. Positive ones love. Seeking good for others, even in suffering, push us up. Adversity becomes a catalyst.
A chance for growth.
Exactly. Spiritual growth.
So if we look at the really big picture, what's the ultimate struggle here?
Ubaldi frames it as a continuous battle. Life versus death. Or maybe the egocentric principle focused on the limited individual self versus the organic, unified principle of unlimited universal life.
And the goal is to move from one to the other.
Yes, to expand life, to break free from the tight grip of ego and matter, and merge into the greater life of the spirit.
And as we do that, fear of death changes.
It diminishes, he suggests, because you're identifying less with the limited physical form and more with that larger, ongoing spiritual reality.
And God in this framework.
God represents the fullness of life at the very peak of evolution, the ultimate destination. The opposite pole isn't some evil entity, but just the fullness of death, the absence of life.
He also suggests the universe isn't mostly empty, dead space.
Right. He believes it's filled with worlds, all serving the purpose of developing life towards this eventual spiritual reintegration. It's a cosmos teeming with purpose.
Okay, one last key area seemed almost paradoxical. The power of non-resistance. How can not fighting be strong?
It sounds counterintuitive in our world, doesn't it?
Totally.
But Ubaldi argues the evolved individual's struggle isn't based on brute force. It's based on justice. And acting justly, he claims, mobilizes cosmic forces.
So the gospel's non-resistance. It's not weakness.
He presents it as the supreme defense.
Yeah.
It makes the truly just person stronger, ultimately, than the conventionally strong people of the world.
Because the rules are different on the spiritual plane.
Exactly. He talks about the other world of the spirit where values are inverted. Who wins and who loses on Earth might look completely different from that higher perspective.
Yeah.
The defeated here could be the victor there.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot to take in from Ubaldi's evolution and gospel. As we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main things listeners should hold on to?
I think, first, this powerful idea of evolution as a spiritual ascent, not just material. And second, how the Gospel's teachings, viewed this way, aren't just nice ideas, but align with the very laws of that ascent.
And the evolved versus involuted distinction, not as labels, but as ways to understand different approaches to life, different moralities, all pointing towards, well, maybe greater harmony.
Greater harmony is spiritual realization, yeah. And his takes on pain as a catalyst, the church's tricky place in the world, that ultimate goal or telefinalism, it provides a really unique lens on existence.
It certainly does. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Consider where you might see yourself or aspects of yourself on that evolved, involuted spectrum Ubaldi describes.
Yeah.
How do his ideas about struggle having a purpose, about that ultimate spiritual goal? How does that resonate with your own journey? What does seeking the kingdom of God actually look like through this evolutionary perspective?
Those are big questions to ponder. And really, we've only scratched the surface. Evolution and gospel goes much deeper.
Absolutely. If this sparked your interest, exploring the full text could definitely give you even more to think about, potentially reshaping how you see the world and your role in it.
Definitely worth considering.